All right, let's take a look at some key ideas that characterize what we call the Renaissance period. So, just to hit it one more time, 1300s through the 1550s is approximately the time period of the Renaissance that came after the Middle Ages. And of course, it is Italian for rebirth, and that is because the Renaissance did start in the Italian city-states that you can see here on the map. And some key terms here. We're talking about a time period in which Italy at the time had a aristocracy, or a group of nobles themselves, and they made a lot of money from trade, and then they would go on to develop an interest and support or become patrons of the arts. And so we get a lot of excellent artwork that people today go to museums such as the Louvre in Paris and take, once in a lifetime trips to Italy to see it in their museums. A lot of this art is obviously spread in other museums throughout the world, but a lot of trips to Europe involve going to see this artwork in its museums. As your text points out, there are a couple of key ideas that were emphasized there as well as in the video, and these ideas of humanism, which again moved away from the theological, the heavens, the emphasis on religion, and put more importance on the humans themselves. And of course that's shared in with this idea of individualism. And again, the importance of studying this is to look and see at the impact of these ideas and the pursuits that people followed up with. So with individualism, you're looking at this idea that it's not a surprise that historians can make the connection that, 100, 200, 300 years later, a guy in England named Adam Smith writes a book called The Wealth of Nations that promotes an economic system, a new economic system, that it's market capitalism that we have championed in the United States from the very inception of our country. This idea that the economies work best when markets work on their own, when people pursue their own ideas to create companies and cater to what consumers want at that time, not what governments or a few nobles want, but just everyone can get in and create a market. So very, very powerful ideas that come out of the Renaissance and make it worth studying. And of course, these are all very interrelated. The idea of secularism, the word secular, meaning non-religious, or worldly, is a good way of understanding this. It's not that religion was disappearing or anything at this time, but there was just a broader perspective offered. So you guys already looked at the video clip, I hope, that introduced all this stuff. I'm not going to, for the sake of time, focus on, but the Renaissance did move out of Italy, obviously, and spreading north, and we're not going to focus on it, but you come across famous artists like a Rembrandt or a Rubens. Of course, we know our geography from the last unit. We're going to skip this for the interest of time. We're not going to emphasize it, but these are some famous works of literature from the time. Very famous books, whether it's Inferno by Dante Alighieri, Sir Thomas More's Utopia, or the Spanish literature classic Don Quixote by Cervantes. These are all things you'll probably come across at some point in your English classes. And of course, even it spread all the way up in England, and Shakespeare considered to be the greatest English Renaissance literary artist influenced by these ideas. And again, they go back to some of the roots that we had talked about earlier in the course, the Greeks and the Romans, their mythology, and or European-styled Christianity. The reason there was more art is because they had money to spend on it now. We're moving out of the medieval ages, the poverty. People were moving to be more than just serfs working the land, and it allowed them to pursue other opportunities. And a famous patron, of course, mentioned earlier in the notes was the famous statesman. He was a multi-talented guy and patron of the arts. He connected a lot of other Italian wealthy people to encourage them to, hey, go ask Michelangelo to do a sculpture of you. Go ask Raphael to put a painting for your living room. So that's kind of what he is famous for, among other things, being an important politician of the era. And again, just to point out the difference between the Middle Ages or the medieval art, is very much, iconic, just not really showing things how they were, but how maybe we'd like it to be in their mind. And again, that's kind of reflective of the society at the time. When you have so many peasants and warfare, it's easy for people to put a picture on their wall to idealize something that they can't have. And as we know in times of history, that there are often pendulum swings where it shifts. And here is one in terms of art where people were looking at things on the wall. They wanted things on their wall that were the ideal, the iconic, and then it swung to the complete opposite, which is the realistic. So they were okay with things being more lifelike because maybe life wasn't so bad. It was an improvement in the Renaissance era as opposed to the earlier medieval era. And again, these ideas, whether it's humanism or individualism or secularism or naturalism, were pushed in and evident here. And you can see it through some of the artwork. Here you can see the Greek and Roman influences, advancements in art, painting as well. Architecture became less practical. Think of your medieval castle, right? That was for protection. Now you can embellish a little bit, right? You can make it more pretty, aesthetically pleasing, showing off some of the skills and advancement in architecture and building, and not just so much on the practicality of preventing people from invading you. And of course, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, named after very famous Renaissance artists. That's not a coincidence. And so if you read from the book, we've got the Sistine Chapel here, one of the famous scenes at the top of this, the ceiling of it. Here's this famous bust or sculpture of David. Here's the Sistine Chapel in its entirety. And of course, you have Da Vinci, probably the most famous, and he becomes, we have this term, the Renaissance man, right? Again, because of the emphasis on humanism, or your human talents and individualism, to develop yourself and be a Renaissance man, be a jack of all trades, not just be a peasant farmer on the land. Learn and develop lots of skills. So you take a person like Da Vinci or Medici, who loved art and was a diplomat and a politician. Those things were encouraged and developed at the time. You're not just a knight. You're not just a peasant. or at least ideally not. Here's his Last Supper. Very famous. And again, it's not like religion and religious themed things disappeared. They were there. Again, talking about the concept of humanism, and a great example of this idea that you're worthy as yourself. Those were expressed, art can reflect life at the time, or does life imitate art? That's the classic cliche. Is no better expressed here than in the Mona Lisa. Everyone asks, who is the Mona Lisa? And it doesn't matter as much just exactly who she was. The point is, she wasn't a famous queen that was getting her art done. So, humanism, individualism, secularism of the time. Key Renaissance ideas.